Are you stuck in the same old routine at work? Do you find yourself hitting a creative wall, unable to see beyond your current perspective? It's time to break free and unlock the power of fresh perspectives.
David Gouthro, yes, back again with Discover Fresh Perspectives. I really do need to find a better way to introduce these than this is David Gouthro back with another fresh perspective. But for now, it's going to have to do. And today I have as my guest, Steve Murgatroyd, who I've known for many, many years in different contexts. And I'm so pleased that you're here today, Steve. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, it's a great pleasure. I'd love to be able to talk and explore the kind of work I've been doing the last while.
Well, why don't we just go for that? What's the work that you've been exploring recently? So you have a better number of your articles and things like that. But for today, what would be most interesting to explore for both of us?
Well, so I just finished my 53rd book. Yeah, exactly. It's called Addiction. So I'm addicted to this writing thing. But I've been writing a lot about the future of higher education around the world, particularly colleges and universities and the skills agenda, but also kind of responding to what I'm seeing. For example, I was just in Italy with a group of higher education leaders from across Europe, exploring what's going on with them. And we're in a kind of polycrisis right now, and nobody seems to know what to do. I'm thinking, well, I think I might. That's the kind of Yorkshireman thing. You know, the definition of a Yorkshireman is we speak our mind even if there's nothing in there. But I've been involved in higher education since 1972. And I got involved in senior level kind of admin back in 77 when I was vice chair of the planning committee of the Open University, responsible for a £300 million budget. And then I was dean of a business school in Alberta. Then I was a provost of a university in Dubai. And I've been consulting for higher education systems, whether institutions or governments, in over 40 countries now since the 1990s. So I've been kind of immersed in this space basically all my adult life.
So, and with that background, I've had an opportunity in the time to write more books than I've probably read.
Yeah, I've actually written more books than I've read. I haven't read half the books I've written, but yeah. I mean, I think the writing, I write so as to find out what I now need to know.
Okay.
And to explore what I think I might know, but need to do a lot more digging in. So it's really, it's kind of a combination of notebook reflection and well, there's a publication here. Let's see what other people think.
So, one of the things that I saw you talk about or write about was about courageous leadership and in the context of higher education. So maybe you could talk a little bit about, first of all, what that means, courageous leadership, and then what are you seeing out there that says this is really, really important today more than ever?
Right. So if you talk to, presidents of universities or colleges around the world, they're called something else around the world, like vice chancellors or whatever. They will tell you that they've never been in a situation like this before, where money is a big issue. That's always been the case. Demography is changing. Birth rates are dropping through the floor right around the world, including in developing economies. So demography is changing. The rules are changing. So Canada, for example, said, you can't have all these international students. They're having too much fun. Well, let's get rid of them. And so those are some things. And then AI comes along and is a massive game changer. Whether you like it or not, what you can't do is ignore it, which is what a lot of institutions are hoping to do. It kind of hope it goes away. And then on top of all that, there are challenges to the value of the products and processes being used. And so many employers are saying these degrees are pretty well worthless, and are shifting away, particularly in the tech sector, shifting away from degree-based entry into the business to competency-based assessments. You don't care what qualifications you've got, tell me what you can do. So these are all significant changes, all happening at the same time. And the instinct of most university and college presidents is business as usual, as often as possible for as long as possible. There's all these kind of crisis issues are hitting the institutions at the same time. On top of which, the turnover rate for these senior positions, presidents and provosts and deans, has gone through the roof. And so people are taking 5-year contracts and leaving after 2. And so we have a real mess on our hands. Now, how do you get out of it? Well, you don't get out of it by doing what we've always done. You get out of it by doing something different. And that, in the context of a university in particular, but also a college, takes real courage to stand up to forces of tradition, cultural kind of history. I mean, I was at the University of Bologna, which was founded in 1042, and it hasn't changed a lot. Some of the staff have moved on, but the place is basically structurally the same, operates on largely the same set of principles, has some innovation activities, but basically the instincts of the leadership of these institutions is not to mess up what's been going well for a couple of 100 years.
Well,
and it takes courage to say, that's not going to work anymore. So that's where I'm kind of starting from.
because it kind of seems that there's courage at a couple of different levels. Because there's also, and again, I don't know, I only know about a few universities here in Canada, but oftentimes you get people on the board that are not exactly put on there to stir things up. They're in many cases political appointees, and it's rare that the government would say, "Oh, okay, we know it's not really working anymore. Try something new." I have a hard time imagining them doing that. So you have that, the courage that the board requires, the courage that the leader of the organization requires, and the courage for those two, again, to work in different ways, and not to be concerned, as I'm sure some people are, about what happens if I lose my job. Is it going to be any different? So all that ego bit and logistics come into it.
Well, thanks for raising the governance issue, because the University of Toronto has 50 members on its board. Apple Computers, Apple Inc. has 15. And we're in a much larger organization with a much tighter board. But the functions of the board of Apple are about anticipation, about imagining where the corporation could go 5, 6, 10 years from now, and what kind of leader we need to succeed Tim Cook and all these kind of things, which is what's on the table right now. Whereas at the university level, the job is to no trouble, no public mess, don't upset the minister, and keep the budgets kind of ticking over so that we're not too far in debt. And so that their instincts are all exactly the opposite of what's needed now. Plus, they're reactionary, not anticipatory. So you're right. The board needs courage. Ministers need courage in getting out the bloody way. I mean, they think they know a lot, but you and I have known lots of ministers in our time. I've known just in Alberta, which is where I live. I've lived with 18 ministers of higher education just since I came back to Alberta in 2003. So, they're only going to last 18 months, 24 months. They have no clue what they're doing. And essentially, they might have a big idea, and everybody tries to stop them talking about it so that they don't get in the way. So that one of the descriptions I have of our system right now is it's a permanently failing system, but it's too big to fail.
Well, I wonder if it is too big to fail.
Well, it will keep ticking over. I mean, some of the institutions will have to do mergers and acquisitions and these things just to sort out their fiscal messes. There's not a university in the Maritimes that's fiscally, in the black. So and we've built too much infrastructure here. So we need to kind of rationalize that. But the system as we know it will basically not change that much until a new entrant arrives that will change the game. And they will not look like anything we see right now. In the book I've just written, I told this story about being a Boy Scout. I was actually on my way to get my Queen's Scout badge.
Oh.
I was walking in the Yorkshire Dales and I got a bit lost. So I said to this farmer, how do I get from here to Grassington? And he said, well, if I were you, I wouldn't start from here. Right?
Okay, that's helpful.
Which is essentially what if I was starting a new university, I wouldn't look at what we do right now. I'd look at something completely different.
Well, especially when, and your point about, a lot of students come out of university basically not able to do anything. Or
Yeah.
in many cases, like, my wife, when she was hiring project managers, and she's an IT project manager, she'd much rather go at the time from someplace like BCIT because she'd hire them because they're ready to work.
Yeah.
Right. And I guess co-op programs go part of the way, but with the shift to hiring people based on their capabilities rather than their credentials, that's a huge, huge shift. But I hear people crying out for it.
Right. And the US federal government and 16 US states have passed legislation to say that in our hiring for any position, you don't need a degree. You need to have the skills for the job. And so there is this kind of mind shift going on. I mean, I did a lot of work for the government of New Zealand around its higher education strategy. And I was flying in one day from Auckland to Wellington, and the newspaper full-page ad was from the top 25 employers in New Zealand saying, we don't care if you have a degree, we want to know you can do the job. Full-page ad. Now, if I'd have been a university president, I would have kind of picked up the phone and said, we need to talk. What do we need to do to change? Nobody did. And that's the courage piece. They don't have courage to imagine a different future from the one they're kind of experiencing right now. So courage is not necessarily, climbing Everest, climbing to the top of a mountain that you've just built. It's about imagining a completely different future, not necessarily using the same tools and resources that we have now.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that restricts people is they look at the tools that they have and they can't imagine doing something different with them. So they don't want to throw the ideas out there knowing that they don't have the tools to get there. And part of it is like, how do we get people to be willing to, not just willing to, but maybe more comfortable to live with uncertainty and unpredictability? Because right now we gravitate towards that. Like that drives so much of our behavior, but in an environment that doesn't allow that anymore.
Yeah. Well, and if you take artificial intelligence, round about a third of university and college academics haven't yet used it. I guarantee you that 96 to 100% of their students have. And the data is there. I mean, if anybody wants the data, I can share it with them. But what mindset says, I'm not going to touch this? What mindset? And the answer is quite a lot.
Well, I remember doing a faculty review at one particular university, and at the time, the president was encouraging people to use more technology. And I'd say the group I was working with were pretty much split 50-50, and half were going, this is great. We're looking forward to use this. We want to learn how to do it. And the other half was, they're trying to get rid of our jobs. Like exactly the same message through a totally different mindset. And it's, at what point do you feel that it's more important to know stuff than to be able to learn stuff? Especially when you put the label expert on top of someone.
Well, so one of the big pushes in Ontario higher education is to go back to handwritten exams. That are invigilated under, proctored conditions, and therefore we won't have cheating. Now, cheating has been with us since the Ming Dynasty, right? So it's not new, and we are co-conspirators in the cheating thing. We've made getting a good grade so critical that it's worth cheating for, and so it's partly our fault. And so here's an example where some courage is needed to say, let's stop exams. Let's reimagine how we assess learning for learning. So that assessment is about improving your learning. We don't really care about grades. We want to know what can you do, and we want to help you do it better.
I'm going to totally gap on his name now, but there's a fellow he was a conductor of an orchestra, and one of the classes he was teaching, he said that I don't want you to worry about the mark. Everyone gets an A. What you need to do is tell me what you're going to do to earn that A, and then do that. And of course, that's great in one class, but you put it in a larger context, and everyone else hated it. And which brings up another thing I wanted to ask a little bit earlier, Steve, is that when you talk moving from assessing knowledge to assessing skills, as part of the impediment that we're much better at knowing how to assess knowledge than we are to actually assess skills.
Yeah. So I'll give you a case study. About 18 people arrived in a particular province in Canada with veterinary skills, very significant levels of veterinary skills from elsewhere in the world. But the rules here meant they'd have to go back to their original first degree and go through all of this thing for 6 years and requalify from beginning to end. And so they said, no, we'll sue you. And so the profession said, well, hang on a minute, they said, well, we have this thing called prior learning assessment. We don't actually know what it is, but we think we can design a competency assessment system, which they use some professional help for. And then they asked the university profs in veterinary schools to assess these very skilled veterinary practitioners as to whether or not they had these competencies. And they found out the profs didn't know how to do that.
Yeah.
So they laid them off and hired veterinary practitioners. And within 47 hours, these people had full credentials to practice in Canada. And every one of them got a job because the people doing the assessment said, I'll hire you in a heartbeat. So your point is taken. I mean, most academic colleagues of mine have no clue what a competency looks like.
Well, and I know there's a lot of consulting firms that make a lot of money helping organizations develop their competency framework, right? And spend a ton of time, like sometimes years doing that. And then I just kind of sit back and go, well, those competencies that you got started on 2 years ago, they don't need those anymore. There's
Exactly.
new ones, right?
Exactly.
So as soon as you codify something, you're hooped, right?
Yep.
Because it doesn't allow for technology to kind of change.
Well, particularly now where, we have super intelligent AI in medicine, for example, where rather than being diagnosed by a doctor, I'd rather be diagnosed by AI because it's more reliable and faster and cheaper.
So, I find the same thing in listening to or reading on social media about the problems, political problems. It polarizes everything. And I find more and more people willing to pile in and say, here's the problem, here's the problem, here's the problem. What are some solutions? What are some, excuse me, what are some paths forward on
So
this?
there's a whole group of us based out of Calgary and Alberta asking and exploring that question. Plus, the Royal Bank of Canada and Higher Education Associates and others are really exploring this question in some national conversations, which I'm part of as well. I mean, I think the answer is to, rather than try wait for, the big institutions to change, is to be the creator of a different organizational design for learning accreditation. So what we're proposing is that we take away the right of institutions to award credentials. And we give that to a third party who doesn't do any teaching, just actually does certification of skills, knowledge, understanding, and capabilities. And we invest in the development of those assessment competencies and validation competencies. And we don't really care where you got your learning from. I mean, who cares? I mean, if you're going to be a pilot and you've done it all through YouTube and, I may have some issues.
Right.
Basically, if you can demonstrate that you're competent and capable against the current criteria, which will change all the time, then you have the credential. And that would be co-designed with instructors, with people in the skilled trades, or people in the professions, or people in the paraprofessions. And we'd all agree that if you can demonstrate these things, you deserve this credential. Institutions will be responsible for enabling learning and supporting learning, not necessarily through degree programs, but through any kind of learning activity they want. Boot camps, micro credentials, short courses, long courses, intense 2-week seminars, whatever they want. We don't care. What we do care about is the skills people claim they have are verifiable and exist. I think unbundling assessment would be one thing. We did a big study in Calgary looking at who's providing learning opportunities to adults in the city of Calgary. And there were 32,000 separate learning activities in a single year, only 16% of which came from colleges or universities. The
And
rest,
that's in one city. That's just in Calgary.
that's just in Calgary.
Wow.
And we also found that about 45% of the adult population spends about 10 hours a week learning something through non-formal methods like, YouTube or going to a club or whatever it may be. So there's a huge amount of learning taking place that never gets recognized or consolidated into a skills profile. And given the skills gaps that we have now, which are getting worse, not less, we need to do something just to actually provide the human capital that our societies need in health and technology and mining or whatever. So we can't survive doing what we do right now.
So, when you said that universities no longer would do the certification or things like that, of course, so many people when they hear this are immediately going to go to, oh, job loss, this loss, whatever, and so huge resistance to that. How big a pilot do you need to test out the proof of concept for something like this? Because it sounds great, and how do you give those who are resisting some sense that this might actually work? Where's the petri dish for something like this?
Well, so we're hoping that might be Alberta, and we're talking to who we think might be the next government. Who knows? But we're talking to what we think could be an incoming government about, all bets are off. Let's reimagine what we do here. But we also got close to this in New Zealand, where the Open Polytechnic of New Zealand actually decided to do exactly this. And so they laid off all of their academic staff and then rehired them against different portfolios, some of which were saying, you're just going to teach. We don't want you designing courses because you're awful at that. We just want you to teach. Or we want you to design courses but not teach. Or we want you just to do assessment. And so we created this unbundled institution that was moving in that direction. And then the government policies shifted. And 16 polytechnics were merged into one, and all, basically this all kind of got lost in the weeds. But I think that they were pretty close to doing what we talked about. And other governments like Malaysia and other Asian governments have looked at doing something like this. There have been some experiments. So I think there are two things we could do. One is deal with specific professions where we know there are labor shortages, like nursing, healthcare, those kind of professions, IT, and do it there. And say to the professional bodies, hey, unless you actually adopt this form of certification, you're out of certification. We will do that through this agency. So that's one approach. And the other is to create a brand new kind of institution that just does accreditation. They don't do any teaching.
There's something else that I'm pretty sure I read that you wrote, which is about when hiring people for universities, to hire them either specifically for research or specifically for teaching. And where I've seen this a challenge in the medical profession, working with specialists, where some specialists they get paid a lot more for being in the operating theater than they do for teaching or this, that, and the other thing. creates tremendous resentment. And how do you balance that out? And it's hard to just change it all at once, but to start with the hiring, that here's the expectations that you are going to be an expert at measuring skills. You're going to be an expert at teaching the skills or something like that. But to separate it, because it's so hard to be good at all of those things because each of them is so complex.
Well, and so actually, it was Tony Bates who made that kind of suggestion that you give people options of, look, here are the three key roles: research, teaching, and creation of knowledge and materials that's not research, right?
Right.
And you ask what combination of these things that person should be really hired to do. What complicates this is that research is also a complete shambles as well. So last year, there were 5.8 million academic publications. Average readership is 4, mum, dad. But I mean, it's a game. And it's made more complicated by the fact that we have predatory journals that you pay to get into. We have 38,000 journals now. It's estimated we'll be at 10 million papers a year with it by 2030. And nobody reads any of this stuff. So it's all about padding the CV, and grant getting is now another lottery that we put people through. So we need to look, this is another area where real courage is needed to reimagine this whole research landscape. And that is all based on hiring people against the same criteria and promoting them against the same criteria that existed when I first went to university in 1969. The game has changed, but the rules haven't.
So where do things like mentoring fit in, Steve? Because like for a lot of for craftspeople and things like that, having someone who's done it before, sort of that one-to-one learning is probably the fastest way to get up to speed, but it's just not economically feasible. Is there room for that in a new world?
Yeah. So one of the pieces of work I've had, around the world is mentoring those people that want to show courage to do something different. And so, I was mentoring the Open Polytechnic in New Zealand. I was mentoring the Smart University of Dubai, both the board and the leadership team. I was mentoring a major institution in the United States, Arizona State, to help them reimagine the world in which they were operating. And all of them started on a journey. And, we could tell you some war stories around, navigating this complex compliance space, navigating the cultural spaces that are involved here that all get in the way of significant change. But this is where this whole courage perspective comes from. If you have very clear understanding of purpose, why am I doing this? What is it meant to create? What's the purpose of the organization in the new world in which we operate? If that's clear and you have the skills and you have courage, you can muddle through.
Well, and how do you go about getting people to believe that the way it's always been done is just not sustainable? Because I think there's a lot of hope that either it will until I retire or whatever might happen to be. And so there's, sometimes people say it's courageous to stand up against change and things like that, which is kind of like not really helpful.
No. That's a really good question, David. I think one of the ways I've been doing it recently is to give examples of success and failure.
Mm-hmm.
And the kind of philosophy I bring to that is you learn more from failure than mirroring success. And there are some fantastic examples of people trying to be courageous but not having the skill to deliver. So there was a vice chancellor of the Open University in the UK who wanted to cut the budget in half, get rid of 1,000 faculty, do all sorts of big stuff. But he had no communication skills, which was ironic because his last job before he got this one was at the BBC. So he lost the plot because he couldn't sell the idea and purpose. there was nothing wrong with what he was proposing at a kind of organizational, operational level. It's just that nobody saw why. And so you and I, as seasoned management consultants, said, if I don't know why and what's in it for me,
Right.
it's not going to fly. And so, I did lots of organizational transformations in the private sector, working for some of the largest corporations in the world when I ran a large consulting company. And I know what it takes to transform an organization and a company like Heinz or Oracle. When you do a big change there, you better be clear about what's in it for them and what the purpose of this change is. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
I also wonder that, and again, all these things make perfect sense, easier said than done, but it does make sense, which is a good start. I sometimes wonder what difference it would make if we could get people to ask different questions. Right. And so like an example, when you talk about how sometimes it seems in higher education, what's required is sustainability. So is stability. So if I ask myself, how do I maintain stability? Leads to a totally different set of possibilities. If I instead ask a different question, how do I ensure longevity? Because those two are not the same, and it's a different question. I think sometimes we keep asking the same questions and come at it the same way. So how do we train people or help them understand that maybe there's some better or some bigger or some richer questions that they should be asking in their leadership role?
Yeah, you have to remember that most people who end up in leadership roles have don't come from a leadership training background. They don't have the kind of insights that come from leadership development work. And they're kind of learning on the job, especially in universities where many are hired because they've done outstanding research or they have, an unusual doctorate that won them awards or something. So the question I'm asking is, how can we constantly regenerate the university? Because, if you build your thinking around design thinking, then everything you're doing right now is just a prototype of what you need to do next. And so the question becomes, what's the next prototype I need to move to? And you can only answer that question if you have a sense of what's 5 years out or 6 years out. And so that's why a lot of the work I've been doing with leaders is using foresight tools, the Futures Triangle, McKinsey's 3-event horizon, a thing from the future from Stuart Candy, using these kind of tools to help leaders imagine what will happen if we do nothing, what will happen if we make this change, and what would happen if we make this one. And now let's look at these 3 pictures and say, how do we navigate the future together here? What's the opportunity here?
Well, and who do you ask that question of? So what just tweaked when you said, so how do we regenerate or reinvigorate the university? If someone is already attached to the notion of the structure of a university, that creates kind of a structure around it. Like, what happens if you ask anybody other than universities? And it's about now not how to regenerate or reinvigorate, but universities. But how do we ensure that we have the people needed to do the jobs that need to be done, or something like that? I guess you kind of have to have some structure, but. Again, it comes back to what's the right question, and who's the best group to ask that of? It's tough.
No, exactly. This is a very tough space, but it's a very pertinent one right now, and it's a hot topic, right across North America, particularly given what's going on in the US, but also right across Europe, because the vice chancellors I was speaking with when I was in Italy know that the future isn't what it used to be, to use Yogi Berra's line. And so they're saying, look, we know we can't do what we've always done and get away with it, but we have no idea what the future looks like clearly enough to know how to get there.
Yeah.
And so I've written about this as the interregnum. The old paradigm is dying, but it's not dead yet. And the new paradigm is emerging, but it's not clear yet. So this is the gray space. And it's another reason why leaders need courage to say, I have seen a future and I'm taking you there. And navigating this gray space. But be aware the future keeps changing.
So this question, I'm thinking I don't have an answer to this question, so I'm going to ask it anyhow. It's like how do you create a culture that enables leaders to be less than perfect and to be vulnerable? When I've worked with some different departments, the department head is anyone's I've worked with, they're unwilling to acknowledge they don't know something, that they're there because they're smarter or because they're more politically connected. And although they may want to explore some things differently, the culture doesn't support that. It's, damn it, you got that. You better know what you're doing. Because the old hierarchy, the old way of doing things, you got ahead because you're smarter, better at everything. And now that doesn't work. But, how do you what's it take? What kind of environment is required to allow people to exercise courage and be imperfect as they seek a yet to defined new paradigm?
So one of the ways we've been tackling that in some of the work I've been doing around the world is not to have a solution, but to sell the problem.
Yeah.
And this is an old Ralph Klein line. When Ralph became Premier of Alberta, a group of us were sent out to say, look, if we do nothing, this is what will happen.
Right.
And we'd modeled the future on a kind of do nothing, everything will look like this. And we showed how long it would take for healthcare in Alberta to go bankrupt. We showed when the school system would have to start, running 2-day weeks. Just if we did nothing. So, we can't do business as usual because it will be unusual to do so in the face of what we think will happen to the population and to these other variables. And so I think the first task is to sell the problem. And the second task is to get them connected to people who are further down the journey. So, one of the things I do is say, well, if that's what your thinking is, you need to talk to, the Technological University of Monterey, which is one of the examples of a courageous place that's done remarkable things. And so why don't you go talk to them? Or Dublin City University, which is on a similar journey, but in a European context. Or, talk to the University of Catalonia. So these people are doing some of the things that are possible and potentially would lead to some of the stuff we're talking about. So they're just 5 years ahead or 6 years ahead of where you are right now. But they started in the same place, and they had your questions when we started those journeys.
So how do people find out who those people are, Steve? Like, you travel all over the place and you meet them, you're like better connected than, yeah, I was going to say, talk to Steve. Well, if we could just put your home number in the program notes, Steve, that'd be great.
So, I've been in the new book that's coming out next year, I've got these case examples, case stories of real successes and real failures in terms of making this courageous journey to a different future. So I've kind of highlighted some of those there. In Canada, Humber Polytechnic has done some remarkable things as a college. So that's featured in this collection of success stories. So, I'm trying to collect success stories and I'm trying to document failure so we can learn from that and learn from these and say, look, here are some lessons on the journey to a different future that you need to consider. Now, you're right, though. One of the problems we have is because leaders are appointed for reasons other than leadership ability, it takes them a while to realize that they don't know what they're doing, and then they're stuck because they spent 2 years telling people they did.
You know what? Just fascinating to speculate on this is to hold a forum, perhaps in Vancouver, only because I'm here. But and in order to attend, you had to be a leader with some position and influence, authority, but admit that you don't know what you're doing, right, or something like that. To come together to explore, to learn from each other without having to have people tell like a lot of people come to conferences to hear someone else's answers instead of having a format where they could learn from each other, and a place where they could be vulnerable and hear the words that they're saying, to have someone else say, well, what do you mean by that? And why do you think that? But in a way that's programmed around helping people grow rather than keeping them in a container.
So that's something that is actually happening through a Vancouver-based agency. The Commonwealth of Learning is based in downtown Vancouver. It works with all nations who are members of the Commonwealth, the British Commonwealth. And Peter Scott, who's the president and CEO, Professor Peter Scott, runs a kind of leadership academy every so often where he brings leaders together, and there are some presentations, but essentially it's about people sitting around in rooms saying, what do you do about this? Because I have no clue. And so, having been to some of these and spoken at some of these many years ago, it's those kind of things that we need more of. So, I think you're dead right. But if you want to run something for Canadian institutions, I think that's what the Royal Bank are funding right now. They're trying to bring together those conversations right now. So, I think you're right. And it's a cusp moment in the history of higher education. If we don't do anything, then we'll have bankruptcies like we've never seen before.
Well, and I mean, we're already seeing like hundreds and hundreds of people being laid off, with no foreign students and things like that. But definitely a challenging time, but it's also not a time to sit back. And I guess one of the things that I like to leave the listeners with, when it's appropriate, is to say, as a result of listening to this podcast, what are some things that you, listener, might want to be thinking about or contemplating? Right? Because again, it's the awareness is helpful. Awareness in and of its own doesn't change. I mean, I keep saying to my clients, the conversations don't change anything, but every change begins with a conversation. So, what are some of the conversations that people should be considering engaging in and initiating?
Well, I think one of the questions I encourage my clients to think about is what's different about the learning experience of Generation Z in your institutions from the baby boomers that you used to have in your institutions? What's changed in that window? And the answer is a lot. And what's going to change with the generation behind Generation Z? And so I want to look at the experience that learners have as a starting point for the conversation. Then I want to ask them, and what's the experience of being an employee, whether you're a faculty member or a leader or an administrator? How has that changed since you started working there? Is it good? Is it better? Or is it not? And if it's not, why? And so I begin with experience, and then I kind of use that to talk about, well, you do realize what's changed is, your budget has been flat for 30 years, but you've now got 3 times as many students. Your resources for teaching and learning have actually declined, but the students have access to more resources because they're using AI and you're not. So let's have a conversation about some of the 15 things that have changed, like demography, money, technology, and so on, that are changing the experience that you have and your students have. How could you make the experience to be amazing? So I begin and end with what it's like for me to be there. Because I think that's the point, right? That we're there for a reason. Is it a great experience? And the answer is increasingly not.
And how to have those conversations and move ahead in a spirit of collaboration rather than competition.
Yeah, and not just within the institution, but between
Yeah.
institutions.
Yeah.
Because I think with the whole notion of a collaboratory that collectively seeks to have a big impact in Vancouver or in Ontario or wherever it may be, that the collective impact of these institutions should be far greater than it actually is. Not just I'm not just talking about, research and development and all this nonsense, which is largely nonsense, by the way. But I think we should be talking about how do these institutions shape the local communities in which we live, work, and play. And they should be doing a heck of a lot more there. And if you go to Eindhoven in the Netherlands, all of the institutions there have decided to break down barriers between them so they can have a bigger impact on their community and can have a bigger impact on the skills agenda, can have a bigger impact on the arts. And so they're saying that, stop thinking about, the 6 colleges and 4 universities competing. There's 10 of us. If we pool assets and resources, we could have a bigger impact.
And sometimes that's what takes the courage to tell the funders, we are going to do this. As a funder, you don't get to dictate what the best thing for us to do for the community. So a couple things. First of all, I've not heard the term collaboratory before, and I love it. Absolutely love it. And secondly, after this call's over, I want to make sure we get in the program notes maybe just 20 or 30 of the books you've written, but some things that would really help people. That'd be great. So
I'll send you a short reading list.
So, Steve, I really just feels like we just begun this, and I would, like to sit down with you and only spend maybe 10 or 20 years. I've been announcing my retirement as June 30th, 2040. So I only want to do work that I love to do. So lots of opportunity for that. So thank you for being here today.
My pleasure, and stay well.
Well, for sure. So this has been David Gouthro with my guest, Steve Murgatroyd. And, next week, we're going to have someone totally different with some other different perspectives. Come on back and hear what we have to offer then.
Subscribe now, because on Fresh Perspectives, every episode is an opportunity to explore new horizons and redefine what's achievable.